This is a chessvideos.tv training video, and this is an endgame study by Lully from 1763. So this is a really old endgame study, but I think it's really important and instructive because it illustrates the critical position for winning when you have a queen versus just a rook. And this does happen from time to time in a game, but it also shows you the way in which the queen and king work together on the board. So I think it's instructive. Now, a note for these kinds of endings, not in this specific position, but when you have a queen against a rook, is that generally for the weaker side, he wants to keep the king and the rook together because they defend each other. If the rook moves too far away from the king, the queen is going to be able to maneuver around, checking the king and eventually winning the rook. And you'll sort of see an example of that in a minute. But this is pretty much the best position black can have if it's white to move. Unfortunately, however, white can then force this position with black to move and will be able to ultimately win the game. So this is a win, and we'll take a look right now. So the start of the position, we're sort of trying to triangulate to get this exact position or a mirror image with black to move. So we start with queen d4 check. Now I'm going to look at king a8, but I want to note that king b8 is going to lead to the exact same thing, and I'll go through that in a minute. So king a8, queen h8 check. Now note that if something like king b8, we just have queen a1 mate. And this is actually an idea that comes up in a couple different lines. So that doesn't work. So really the only option is king a7, when you'll notice after queen d8 that we have the exact same position as before, only it's black to move. So now we're going to see how white wins. But first I want to look at that, this is the original position, the exact same thing, only with white to move. And after queen d4, if black comes to b8, you'll see that after queen d6 check, king a8 is forced, or king rook 2, but king a8, queen a3 check, king b8, queen a5. We have the exact same position we had before, only it's black to move, and it's sort of a mirror image or rotated version of that. So everything we analyze shortly will be relevant to this position or the king and rook position in any corner. Although it is a mirror image, so you'll want to try to practice that some on your own. So we started off with queen d4 check, king a8, queen h8, king a7, queen d8, and we got the starting position only with black to move. So now we're going to go through every single possible move for black and show that this is a win for white. So the first thing to look at is a king move, and there's only one king move. And we have queen a8 check, rook a7 is forced, and after queen b8, black is going to be checkmated in either one or two moves by queen b6 mate, or if he blocks with the rook, we're going to capture and then play mate. So king a6 loses. So the only other option are rook moves, but unfortunately for black, every single rook move loses. Obviously, rook b8, well actually it's not obvious, but rook b8, queen a5 is mate. So that's one. There's the first move. We're going to look at all the moves on the b file first. Now the next option is rook b6 check, but obviously that loses to queen takes b6. King a8, queen b7, so the rook b6 doesn't work, so we've canceled out these two squares. Now we look at rook b5, obviously loses to king takes b5. So the next tricky one is rook b4, but then queen a5 check, forks the king and rook, winning the rook. And this is sort of the common idea in this position, is that the black rook is going to have to move far away from its king, and white's going to get a fork that wins the rook. So rook b4 loses to queen a5 check. So now rook b3. But here we have a slightly more complicated fork with queen d4. Now note if king a8, we have again queen a4 winning the rook. So if king a6, we have queen a4 mate. So the only move is king b8 when we have queen f4. And now if back here we have checkmate, and if here we play queen a4 picking up the rook, so king a8 is the only move, and queen a4 wins the rook. So rook b3 fails after check, king b8, and queen f4 check. So next we have to look at rook b2. We looked at b3, so now let's look at rook b2, but then just queen d4 check picks up the rook. So the last try along the b file is rook b1, and this puts the rook the farthest distance away from the king, which makes it a little bit trickier, but whenever the rook is this far away from the king, the enemy queen is going to be able to check the king and get a fork. For example, king d8, king a8, queen h8. Keep in mind this would be played even if the king had come to b7. Now king a7 is forced, and queen h7 picks up the rook on this side. Check, taking the rook. So once he moves, we're going to be winning. So we've gone through every single square on the b file. Can't come here because of mate. Here we just take it. Here we take it. Here, if he comes to b4, queen a5 check. b3 and b1 are a little bit tricky, but the queen still wins the rook. So now the only moves we have to look at are along this black second rank. So obviously here loses, queen takes, here loses, so really there are only three options. So we'll look at rook f7 first. We have queen d4 check, and again we're going to keep checking the king to get him to a square where we can check both the king and rook. Check the king and attack the rook at the same time. King a8, queen a1 check, and now rook a7 blocking is a possibility, but we saw this theme earlier, only it was along the h file. We have queen h8 mate. It was along the a file, sorry. So the rook can't interpose after queen a1, which means king b8 is forced when we have queen b2. And now if king c8, we have mate down here. King a8, and notice our queen has maneuvered so that she can come to a2 check, winning the rook. And the rook can try to interpose, but again we have checkmate. So this is a common idea, is we're either going to set up a fork or we're going to checkmate black. So rook f7 loses to queen d4 and queen a1 check. So really that leaves rook g7 when queen d4 picks it up. So the final move for black to try is rook h7. And now we're going to see that again, once it's this far away from the king, it's hopeless for the rook. Queen d4 check. If king b8, that's one possibility. We have queen b4, king a7, queen a4 check, king b8, and notice we're maneuvering the queen around queen b3 check. And again, if the king moves here to a8, we can just come to g8. So a7 is the only move. Queen a2 check, king b8, and now finally we've maneuvered the queen. Queen b1 wins the rook. So after queen d4 check, rook h7, queen d4 check, the king has to come to a8, and we have a1 check. If the rook interposes, again we have checkmate. So king b8 is the only move, and queen b1 check picks up the rook. So a very instructive game in that it shows how if you're playing with queen against rook, black needs to try as hard as black can to keep the rook and king together, because if it strays too far, the queen is going to maneuver around and eventually check the king and rook at the same time, winning the rook. And this is an endgame study by Lolly from 1763. And remember that we have the initial position. We want to get black to move here, so we just triangulate a little bit with queen d4 check, king a8, queen h4, king a7, and finally queen d8, and suddenly it's black to move in the same position. You should definitely try to practice this on your own. In fact, we've set up an endgame simulator, I believe, so that you can practice queen checkmating with the queen against a rook. So practice it on your own, and remember that we proved that every single move here loses for black.